rain in Chicago doesn't just get you wet, it tries to erase you. It wasn't a cleansing shower, but a freezing, relentless sheets of gray that blurred the lines between the sidewalk and the street, turning the world into a smudge of charcoal and neon. To the thousands of commuters rushing toward the Union Station subway entrance, the man and the little girl standing on the corner weren't people. They were just obstacles, shadows to be stepped around, ignored and forgotten before the traffic light even turned green. The weight of a dollar Jack Miller adjusted his grip on his daughter's hand, his calloused fingers wrapping protectively around her small, cold palm. The wind, that infamous hawk blowing off Lake Michigan, cut right through the thin denim of his work jacket. It found the holes in his boots and the cracks in his spirit. "Just a few more blocks, Lil Bit," Jack said, his voice raspy from inhaling drywall dust all day. He looked down at Lily. She was 7 years old, but in her oversized second-hand puffer coat, she looked 5. She didn't complain. She never complained. That was the thing that broke Jack's heart more than the cold, her quiet acceptance of their struggle. He did the mental math for the 10th time that hour. He had $42 in his pocket. Rent for the basement apartment in the South Side was due in 3 days. The grocery budget was non-existent. If they walked the 20 blocks to the bus stop instead of taking the L train from here, he could save $5. $5 meant a gallon of milk and maybe a box of mac and cheese. "I'm okay, Daddy," Lily said, her teeth chattering slightly. She squeezed his hand, sensing his anxiety like a biological radar. "I like walking. It's an adventure." Jack forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. An adventure. That's what he called it when the heat got turned off. That's what he called it when dinner was toast and peanut butter for the 3rd night in a row. The Divide, they stood at the corner of Wacker and Adams, waiting for the walk signal. The city was screaming around them. Taxi horns, the screech of brakes, the low hum of a million conversations happening at once. This was the financial district. Towering steel and glass skyscrapers loomed overhead, disappearing into the low-hanging clouds. Jack watched the people around him, men in tailored wool trench coats, women in Italian leather boots, all shouting into AirPods or checking smartwatches. They smelled like expensive coffee and dry cleaning. Jack smelled like wet concrete and sweat. There was an invisible wall right down the middle of the sidewalk. On one side, the people who mattered. On the other side, Jack and Lily. "Look, Daddy," Lily whispered, pointing a gloved finger toward a utility pole near a parked luxury SUV. "That lady is crying." Jack followed her gaze. A few yards away, a woman was fighting a losing battle against the wind. She was dressed in clothes that probably cost more than Jack made in a year, a beige cashmere coat that was now dark with rain, and heels that were sinking into a puddle. But her posture wasn't one of power. It was the posture of someone who had been hollowed out from the inside. It was Claire Sterling. Of course, Jack didn't know her name yet. He only saw a rich woman having a breakdown in public. The sound of desperation. She was trying to tape a flyer to the wet metal of the light pole. The tape wouldn't stick. The wind kept whipping the paper out of her hands. She fumbled, dropped the roll of tape into the slush, and let out a sound that cut through the noise of the traffic. It wasn't a scream, it was a sob, a raw, guttural sound of pure exhaustion. Most people walked past her. A businessman actually bumped her shoulder with his umbrella and didn't even stop to apologize, just checked his phone and kept moving. To them, she was just a crazy lady disturbing their commute. "Come on, Lily," Jack said, tugging gently on her hand. The light changed. "But Daddy, she dropped her picture," Lily said, digging her heels in. Jack looked back. The flyer had landed face up in a puddle near the curb. The woman, Claire, had fallen to her knees, indifferent to the freezing water soaking her knees. She was frantically trying to peel the wet paper off the asphalt without tearing it. Jack hesitated. The survival instinct in him screamed, "Keep walking. Trouble loves company," and he couldn't afford any more trouble. Rich people had safety nets. Jack had a tightrope. If he got involved, if he missed his bus, if he got hassled by the cops for loitering, the risks were too high. But then he saw it. He saw the way the woman's hands were shaking. It wasn't the tremors of the cold. It was the shaking of a person whose soul was vibrating with panic. He knew that shake. He felt it every time he looked at his bank account, every time Lily got a fever, and he couldn't afford a doctor. And he saw the picture on the soggy paper, the face in the puddle. It was a color photo of a boy, maybe 8 years old. He had bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile, wearing a baseball cap. Above the photo, in bold red letters that were starting to bleed from the rain, was the word missing. Below that, have you seen Matthew? Reward $50,000. $50,000. That number flashed in Jack's mind like a neon sign. That was a life. That was college for Lily. That was a house where the wind didn't come through the walls. But then he looked at the woman again. She had retrieved the paper and was clutching it to her chest, rocking back and forth on the sidewalk, oblivious to the rain matting her hair to her face. She looked small. Money didn't make you bulletproof against loss. Daddy, Lily said again, her voice soft but firm. We have to help. Jack looked down at his daughter. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the city lights. She didn't see a rich lady or a poor lady. She just saw a mom who was sad. Jack let out a long, defeated sigh. The bus was going to leave without them. They were going to walk home in the dark. But he couldn't teach his daughter to be good if he acted like the rest of the world. All right, Jack grunted. Stay close to me. He stepped off the curb, splashing through the gutter, crossing the invisible line that separated his world from hers. He approached the woman slowly, keeping his hands visible, not wanting to scare her. Ma'am? Jack's voice was deep, rough like gravel. Claire Sterling didn't look up. She was staring at the ruined flyer in her hands, whispering something over and over again. Jack leaned in closer to hear her. Please, she whispered to the wet pavement. Somebody just look. Please, just look. Jack crouched down. His knees popped audibly. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a cleanish bandana he used for sweat, and held it out. The tape won't stick because the pole is wet, ma'am, Jack said gently, and the paper's soaked. You're not going to get it to stay. Claire looked up. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in black streaks. Her eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with the kind of fatigue that comes from staring at the ceiling for 300 nights in a row. She looked at Jack, really looked at him, and for a second she looked terrified. A large man in dirty clothes looming over her. But then Lily stepped forward. The little girl in the oversized pink coat stood next to her father, looking like a tiny beacon of color in the gray storm. My daddy can fix anything, Lily said with absolute confidence, even if he doesn't have any tape. Claire blinked, the fear slowly replaced by confusion, and then a flicker of something else. Recognition, hope, or just shock that someone had actually stopped. Jack didn't wait for permission. He stood up, looked around, and spotted a dry patch under the awning of a nearby newsstand. Give me the stack, ma'am, Jack said, extending a hand toward the plastic bag of flyers she was clutching. And get up off the ground. You're gonna catch pneumonia, and that won't help your boy. It was the first time anyone had spoken to her like a human being, not a victim or a nuisance, in months. Claire took Jack's hand. Her grip was weak, her skin ice cold against his rough palm. As he pulled her to her feet, a gust of wind tore another flyer loose. It danced through the air, spiraling down the street, landing right at Lily's feet. The little girl picked it up. She stared at the face of the missing boy. Her eyes narrowed, her head tilting to the side. The innocence on her face vanished, replaced by a sharp, sudden intensity. Daddy, Lily said, her voice trembling slightly. Yeah, baby? Jack was busy brushing the dirt off Claire's coat. I know him, Lily said. The words were quiet, but they hit Jack harder than the Chicago wind. He froze. Claire froze. The noise of the city seemed to drop away, leaving only the sound of the rain hitting the pavement. What did you say? Claire whispered, her voice cracking. Lily looked up, her blue eyes wide with a terrifying certainty. I know him, Lily repeated, pointing a small finger at the boy in the picture. He lives in the house with the blue windows, the one where the bad man lives. The suspicion. The silence that followed Lily's confession was heavier than the Chicago humidity. For a heartbeat, the world stopped spinning. The taxi horns and the rumble of the L train overhead faded into a dull roar, leaving only the sound of 3 breaths hanging in the cold air. Then Claire Sterling snapped. The vulnerability Jack had seen in her just moments ago, the sobbing, broken mother, vanished. In its place was a sharp, frantic energy, fueled by adrenaline and the terrified skepticism of the wealthy. She lunged forward, grabbing Lily by her small shoulders. What did you say? Claire's voice was a shriek, her fingernails digging into the cheap fabric of Lily's puffer coat. You saw him? Where? Tell me right now. Is he safe? Hey, Jack barked. The sound was deep and authoritative, a voice honed on construction sites where danger was always present. He didn't think. He reacted. Jack shoved his heavy body between the woman and his daughter, breaking her grip with a forceful sweep of his arm. He pushed Lily behind his legs, shielding her like a wall of denim and flannel. "Back off, lady," Jack warned, his eyes narrowing into slits. "You touch my kid again, and I don't care who you are or how much money you got." Claire stumbled back in her expensive heels, nearly slipping on the wet grate. She looked at Jack, and for the first time, her eyes weren't just sad. They were calculating. She looked at his worn-out boots, the grime under his fingernails, and the desperate poverty that clung to them like the smell of stale cigarettes. "Is this a hustle?" Claire spat out, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She reached for her purse, clutching it tight. "Is that what this is? You see a flyer, you see a desperate woman, and you coach your kid to say something? How much? How much do you want to tell me it was a mistake?" The accusation hit Jack like a slap in the face. His jaw tightened, the muscles in his neck cording. This was the look he knew well, the look that said people like him were only capable of two things: manual labor or crime. "We don't want your money," Jack said, his voice low and dangerous. "Come on, Lily, we're leaving." He grabbed Lily's hand and turned to walk away, his pride stinging worse than the wind chill. He had tried to be a good Samaritan, and this was the thanks he got. The detail. "No, Daddy, wait!" Lily dug her heels into the sidewalk, resisting his pull. "Lily, let's go. She thinks we're lying," Jack snapped, though his grip on her hand remained gentle. "But I'm not lying," Lily shouted, her high-pitched voice cracking with frustration. She pulled away from Jack and stepped back toward Claire, who was standing frozen, torn between hope and suspicion. Lily looked up at the woman. "He doesn't wear the hat anymore," the little girl said softly. Claire froze, her breath hitched in her throat. "What? The picture?" Lily pointed to the soggy flyer in Claire's hand. "He has a baseball cap in the picture, the red one with the C, but he doesn't wear it there. The bad man took it. He threw it in the trash can in the alley. I saw it." Claire's face went pale, drained of all color. She dropped the plastic bag of flyers. They scattered across the wet pavement, faces of her missing son multiplying in the puddles. "Matthew never took that hat off," Claire whispered, her voice trembling. "He slept in it. It was his lucky hat. Nobody knows that but me." She looked at Lily, really looked at her, and the suspicion in her eyes shattered, replaced by a raw, terrifying hope. A random grifter might guess about a location, but a specific detail about a discarded item in an alley? That was too real. That was a memory, not a lie. The bargain Claire took a step forward, her hands open in a gesture of surrender. "Please," she choked out. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I've had so many false leads. People calling me, lying to me for the reward money. Please don't leave." Jack stopped. He looked at the woman, then down at his daughter. Lily was nodding, her eyes pleading with him to stay. She's got a heart too big for this city, Jack thought. He let out a long breath, watching his breath plume in the cold air. He checked his watch. The last express bus was gone. They were committed now. "You said a house with blue windows," Jack said, turning back to face Claire. "Where, Lily? Be specific." "It's the old brick one," Lily explained, her voice small. "On 5th Street, past the underpass, near where you worked on that roof last month. I took the shortcut through the alley to bring you lunch, remember?" Jack's blood ran cold. He knew exactly where she meant. It was a derelict row house in a neighborhood that even the cops hesitated to patrol after dark. A place where the streetlights were always shot out and the corners were owned by crews you didn't make eye contact with. "I know the place," Jack muttered, a knot of dread forming in his stomach. "It's a trap house. Squatters. Dealers. It ain't a place for a kid." "Take me there," Claire demanded. The fragility was gone from her posture. The mother bear had woken up. "Take me there right now." Jack shook his head. "Lady, you walk into that neighborhood dressed like that, driving—" He glanced at the Porsche Cayenne parked illegally at the curb. "Driving that? You won't make it 2 blocks. And I ain't getting my daughter killed trying to play hero." "I don't care," Claire screamed, grabbing Jack's arm. "That is my son. If he is there, I am going. If you won't take me, I'll go myself. I'll scream his name until someone answers." Jack looked at her crazy eyes. She meant it. She would walk straight into a den of wolves and get herself killed, and maybe the boy too if the kidnappers panicked. He looked at Lily. She was shivering, but she stood tall. "We have to, Daddy," she whispered. Jack Miller was a man of simple rules. Work hard, keep your head down, protect your own. Tonight, he was about to break every single one of them. Okay, Jack said, his voice hard as granite. But we do this my way. You don't scream, you don't run, and you do exactly what I say. Into the night. He walked over to the passenger side of her sleek, black SUV and opened the door. The interior smelled like vanilla and new leather, a stark contrast to the smell of wet asphalt and exhaust they were breathing. Get in the back, Lily, Jack ordered. He turned to Claire, who was fumbling with her keys, her hands shaking so bad she dropped them twice. Jack snatched the keys from the ground before she could. I'm driving, he said flatly. You're in no state to be behind the wheel, and I know the shortcut to minimize the time we spend sitting at lights. In that neighborhood, a stopped car is a target. Claire didn't argue. She climbed into the passenger seat, looking small against the plush leather. Jack slid into the driver's seat. It felt alien to him, too comfortable, too adjustable. He adjusted the mirror, catching a glimpse of his own tired eyes. Where are we going? Claire asked, her voice barely audible as the engine purred to life. The Bottoms, Jack said, putting the car in gear. If your boy is there, pray he's the only one inside. Jack merged the expensive car into traffic, the windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the strengthening storm. They were leaving the safety of the lights and heading into the darkness, crossing a line from which they might not return. A spaceship in the graveyard. The transition wasn't gradual. In Chicago, poverty hits you like a physical blow. 1 minute, the Porsche was gliding past the illuminated storefronts of the Loop, and 10 minutes later, they were passing under the rusting steel skeleton of the L tracks, plunging into a world where the streetlights were either shot out or flickering with a sickly orange hum. Jack drove with white-knuckled precision. He kept the luxury SUV in the middle lane, avoiding the potholes that could swallow a tire whole. The silence inside the cabin was suffocating. The only sound was the rhythmic thwack-thwack of the wipers and the high-performance engine purring, a sound that felt obscene in this neighborhood. Lock your door, Jack muttered, though he had already hit the master switch the moment they crossed Roosevelt Road. Claire was staring out the window, her breath fogging up the glass. She looked at the boarded-up row houses, the liquor stores behind bulletproof glass, and the groups of young men huddled on corners in oversized hoodies, eyeing the passing car with predatory interest. I've lived in this city my whole life, Claire whispered, her voice trembling. I've never been down this street. Most people haven't, Jack replied, his eyes scanning the rearview mirror. That's why they pick places like this. You scream here. Nobody calls 911. They just turn up the TV. The reality of the situation was settling in. This wasn't a movie. They were driving a $90,000 billboard through a neighborhood where people got jumped for their sneakers. The girl in the alley. Why were you there? Claire asked suddenly, turning in her seat to look at Lily in the back. Her tone wasn't accusatory anymore. It was confused. Lily, honey, why were you in an alley behind a trap house? You're 7 years old. Jack's jaw tightened. He saw the shame flush Lily's cheeks in the rearview mirror. Don't ask her that, Jack said sharply. I need to understand, Claire pressed, desperation edging her voice. If she saw Matthew, how close was she? We collect cans, Lily said softly. Her voice was small, barely rising above the hum of the heater. On Tuesdays, the recycling trucks don't come to the alleys until Wednesday morning. Daddy holds the flashlight, and I check the blue bins. We get 5 cents a can. Claire fell silent. She looked at Jack, really looked at his worn jacket, his tired eyes. She realized then that while she was worrying about stocks and galas, this man and his daughter were navigating a literal underground economy just to eat. That day, Lily continued, staring at her own small boots. Daddy was down the block. I went ahead because I saw a big pile of boxes. I thought maybe there were cans under them. That's when I saw the van. A van! Claire leaned forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. Gray, Lily said, with rust on the bottom. The bad man opened the side door. He pulled the boy out. The boy was kicking. He dropped his hat. The bad man picked it up and threw it in the dumpster. He looked right at me, but I was hiding behind the boxes. He had a spider on his neck. A spider? Jack asked, his blood running cold. A tattoo, Lily explained, tracing a shape on her own neck. A black spider, right here. Jack cursed under his breath. He knew that mark. The Webbs, a low-level distribution crew, nasty, unpredictable, and usually high on their own supply. This wasn't just a kidnapping, it was gang territory. Boots on the ground. "We're getting close," Jack announced, killing the headlights. He didn't drive up to the house, that was rookie stuff. Instead, he turned down a side street 3 blocks away, pulling the Porsche behind a massive overflow dumpster that smelled of rotting garbage and wet cardboard. It was the only cover available. "We walk from here," Jack said, unbuckling his seatbelt. "Leave your purse. Leave your phone. If we get stopped, you got nothing on you." "Leave my phone?" Claire panicked. "What if we need to call for help?" "If you pull out an iPhone 15 out here, you won't have a hand left to hold it," Jack said grimly. "I got a burner. That's enough." They stepped out of the warm car into the biting rain. The wind here felt sharper, carrying the scent of sulfur and decay. Jack zipped Lily's coat up to her chin and pulled her hood down. "Stay behind me," he instructed. "Step where I step. Watch for glass." They moved like ghosts through the shadows. Jack led them through a narrow gangway between 2 crumbling brick buildings, avoiding the open sidewalk. Under his feet, syringes crunched like dry leaves. Claire was struggling. Her heels were sinking into the mud, and her teeth were chattering violently. But she didn't complain. The image of her son being dragged by a man with a spider tattoo was fueling her every step. She was terrified, but her love was a ferocious, burning thing that kept her moving. The Fortress of Decay. "There," Lily whispered, stopping dead in her tracks. Jack crouched down behind a rusted chain-link fence, pulling Claire and Lily down with him. Across the vacant lot, standing alone like a rotten tooth in a healthy gum line, was the house. It was a narrow 2-story brick structure that looked like it had survived a fire. The windows on the first floor were boarded up with plywood, spray-painted with gang tags. But on the second floor, just like Lily had said, the windows were painted over with a thick, sloppy coat of blue paint to block out the light. "The blue windows," Claire gasped, a sob catching in her throat. "He's in there. I can feel it." The house was dark, silent. It looked abandoned to the untrained eye. But Jack saw the signs. A fresh tire track in the mud of the driveway, a heavy-duty padlock on the side gate that looked too new, and a thin, faint line of light escaping from the bottom of one of those blue windows. "Someone's home," Jack whispered. He looked around. The street was desolate. No police patrols came down here. If they went in, they were on their own. "Okay," Jack said, his voice low and steady. "Here's the plan. I go check the perimeter. I need to find a way in that doesn't involve the front door. That door is going to be reinforced." "I'm coming with you," Claire said. "No." Jack grabbed her arm, his grip firm. "You stay here with Lily, behind this fence. If you hear shots, you run. You don't look back. You run to the main road and you flag down a bus. You understand me?" "I am not leaving my son," Claire hissed, her eyes wild. "You aren't leaving him," Jack said, his tone softening just a fraction. "You're his getaway driver. If I get him out, I need you ready to move. Can you do that?" Claire looked at the house, then at Lily, then at Jack. She nodded, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "Bring him back to me." Jack nodded once. He stood up, pulled his collar up, and slipped into the darkness of the vacant lot, moving toward the house with the silent determination of a man who had nothing left to lose but his honor. As he crossed the muddy yard, a dog barked from inside the house, a low, vicious sound. Jack froze. The game had just changed. They knew someone was out there. The basement window. The bark didn't come again. It hung in the air like a gunshot echo, leaving Jack frozen in the mud, half crouched behind a rusted-out dryer that had been dumped in the side yard years ago. He counted to 30, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The rain was his ally now. The relentless drumming on the roof and the plastic tarps covering the neighbor's porch helped mask the sound of his breathing. Jack crept forward, staying low. He bypassed the side door. Even in a dump like this, guys like Spider would reinforce the doors. They'd have deadbolts, maybe a 2F4 dropped into brackets on the inside. Jack wasn't a burglar. He was a contractor. He knew how houses in this part of Chicago were built and how they fell apart. He found what he was looking for near the ground, a hopper window into the basement. The glass was painted over with black spray paint, but the wood frame was rotting. Years of Chicago winters had turned the timber soft and spongy. Jack pulled a flathead screwdriver from his back pocket. He never left home without it. He jammed it into the gap between the sash and the frame. He didn't pry against the lock. He dug into the rotting wood of the sill, with a wet, splintering crunch that made him wince. The wood gave way. The entire lock mechanism popped out of the disintegrated frame. He slid the window open. A blast of warm, stagnant air hit his face. The smell of mildew, cat litter, and something chemical. Meth? Or just ancient dirt? Jack feet first slid into the darkness, landing on a pile of damp laundry. He was in. Two worlds, one fence back. At the chain-link fence, time was warping. For Claire, every second felt like an hour. She clutched her coat tighter, her teeth chattering so hard her jaw ached. She stared at the dark silhouette of the house, terrified that at any moment a gunshot would flash from those windows. Lily was sitting on a discarded milk crate, her legs swinging rhythmically. She wasn't shivering anymore. She had gone into that quiet place children go when the world is too much. "Lily," Claire whispered, needing to break the suffocating silence. "Your dad, he's very brave." Lily looked up, her face obscured by her hood. "He's not brave. He's just tired." "Tired?" "He says when you're tired enough of the bad stuff, you just fix it so you can sleep," Lily said with a wisdom that sounded wrong coming from a 7-year-old. "Like fixing a leaky pipe. You just do it." Claire looked at the girl, really looked at her. She thought about her own life. When things broke in Claire's world, she called a service. She paid a man. She sued someone. She had never fixed a leak in her life. She had never had to be tired the way Jack was. "Where is your mom, honey?" Claire asked gently. "She left," Lily said simply. "She didn't like the cold. She said we were too heavy to carry." Claire felt a physical ache in her chest. She reached out and took Lily's small gloved hand. The leather of Claire's glove met the cheap knitted wool of Lily's. "I'm sorry," Claire whispered. "It's okay," Lily said, squeezing back. "Daddy carries me. He's strong." The layout Jack moved up the basement stairs. The wood creaked, but the noise from the floor above was loud enough to cover him. A TV was blasting. A basketball game. The Bulls were playing. He could hear the squeak of sneakers on the court and the roar of the crowd coming through the floorboards. He cracked the door to the kitchen. The light was harsh, fluorescent. The kitchen was a disaster zone. Pizza boxes stacked like towers, beer bottles, an overflowing ashtray. At the kitchen table, two men sat. One was massive, wearing a gray hoodie. That had to be the muscle. The other was skinny, jittery, pacing back and forth while looking at a smartphone. "I'm telling you, Rico is late," the skinny one said. "If he don't show with the cash by midnight, I'm bouncing. I ain't catching a case for this kid." "Shut up and sit down," the big man grunted. He turned his head and Jack saw it. A black widow spider tattoo crawling up the side of his neck, disappearing behind his ear. Jack's stomach turned. This was it. He needed to get to the second floor. The stairs were past the kitchen through a short hallway. He had to wait for a distraction. Suddenly, the skinny guy slammed his phone on the table. "I got a leak." He walked toward the bathroom, which was right next to the basement door where Jack was hiding. Jack held his breath, pressing himself flat against the dark stairwell wall. The skinny guy walked past the door, oblivious, and went into the bathroom. Now, Jack slipped out of the basement door, moving like a shadow across the hallway carpet. He hit the stairs to the second floor. He took them two at a time, skipping the steps that looked warped, praying they wouldn't groan. The blue room. The upstairs hallway was dark, smelling of dust and old insulation. There were 3 doors. 2 were open, revealing empty bedrooms full of trash. The third door, at the end of the hall, was closed. A heavy-duty padlock hasp had been screwed into the frame, but, miraculously, the padlock was hanging open, unlocked. Lazy, Jack thought. They got complacent. He crept to the door and listened. Nothing. No crying, no movement. Panic spiked in his chest. Was he too late? Jack slowly turned the knob and pushed. The door swung open on silent hinges. The room was illuminated by a single street lamp outside, filtering through the blue-painted glass, casting the room in a sickly underwater hue. In the corner, on a dirty mattress with no sheets, lay a small shape. Jack rushed over, falling to his knees. It was Matthew. The boy was wearing the same clothes from the flyer, now filthy. He was curled in a fetal position, his eyes closed. "Hey," Jack whispered, shaking the boy's shoulder gently. "Matthew, wake up, buddy." The boy groaned, his eyelids fluttering. He looked drugged, or maybe just severely dehydrated. He opened his eyes, looking at Jack with zero recognition, just dull fear. Don't hit me, the boy mumbled, his voice a dry rasp. I ain't gonna hit you, Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. Your mama's outside. I'm gonna take you home. Jack moved to scoop the boy up, but Matthew flinched and let out a sharp cry of pain. My leg! It hurts! Jack looked down. Matthew's ankle was swollen, purple and black, broken. Jack cursed silently. He can't walk. I have to carry him. Jack was strong, but carrying an 8-year-old dead weight down creaky stairs, past 2 gangsters, one of whom was the size of a linebacker, the odds just tanked. Suddenly, the floorboards in the hallway creaked. Jack froze. He heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. The big guy, Spider. Hey, who left the upstairs light on? Spider's voice boomed from the stairwell. Jack looked around the room. No closet, no under the bed. He was trapped. He pulled the burner phone from his pocket. His hands were shaking, but his thumbs were fast. He texted the number he had dialed to test the phone earlier, Claire's phone, which was in her purse in the car. But wait, she left the purse. Think, Jack, think. He remembered the car, the alarm. He texted the only other number he knew. He didn't know if it would work. He texted 911? No, too slow. He looked at the window, the blue paint. He grabbed a piece of debris from the floor, a heavy chunk of plaster. He needed a diversion, a big one. Downstairs, the bathroom door opened. The skinny guy came out. I didn't leave no light on, the skinny guy yelled up. Then who is up there? Spider growled. The footsteps sped up. They were running toward the room. Jack grabbed Matthew, pulling the boy against his chest, and kicked the door shut, throwing the deadbolt from the inside just as a heavy body slammed against it from the hallway. Thud. Open the door, Spider screamed. Jack looked at the window. It was their only way out, but it was a 20-foot drop to concrete. He needed help. He needed the one person he had told to stay put. The siege. The first blow to the door shook the entire frame, sending a shower of lead paint chips raining down onto the floorboards. Thought du years weren't done. Open the damn door or I'll put a slug through it. Spider's voice was muffled but terrifyingly close. Jack didn't waste breath answering. He knew the anatomy of these cheap, hollow-core doors. The deadbolt he'd thrown was solid, but the frame itself was dried-out pine. 2, maybe 3 good kicks from a guy Spider's size, and the wood would split like a toothpick. Jack spun around, scanning the room. It was a prison cell disguised as a bedroom. A stained mattress, a pile of fast food wrappers, and a heavy ancient radiator violently hissing in the corner. Matthew, listen to me, Jack said, his voice low and urgent. He grabbed the boy's face gently with both hands, forcing the child to look at him. Matthew was trembling so hard his teeth clicked together. We are going out the window. It's going to be cold, and it's going to be scary. But you have to hold on tight. Can you do that? My leg, Matthew whimpered, tears cutting clean tracks through the grime on his face. I know, buddy. I know. Jack stripped off his heavy canvas work jacket. He wrapped it around the boy, zipping it up. It swallowed the small child, but it would offer some padding. This is going to hurt, but then you're going to see your mom. She's right outside. Crack. The doorframe splintered near the lock. The tip of a crowbar appeared in the gap, wrenching the wood apart. The improvisation, Jack grabbed the dirty sheets from the mattress. They were thin, cheap polyester, but he didn't have time to braid them. He tied the corners together in a square knot, the kind that tightened under pressure. He tested it with a violent yank. It held. He rushed to the window. The blue paint made it impossible to see out, and the sash was painted shut. There was no time to pry it. Jack wrapped his fist in the excess fabric of the sheet and punched. Smash! The glass exploded outward. The noise was deafening in the small room, sharper than the thunder rolling overhead. Freezing wind and rain instantly whipped into the room, carrying the sound of the city and the smell of ozone. Jack cleared the jagged shards from the sill with his forearm, ignoring the glass slicing into his skin. He leaned out. Claire, he roared into the storm. It wasn't a question, it was a command. Down in the muddy yard, a figure detached itself from the shadows of the fence. Claire didn't hesitate. She didn't look like a CEO anymore. She looked like a linebacker. She sprinted across the debris-strewn lot, slipping in the mud, scrambling toward the wall directly under the window. I'm here, she screamed, looking up, her face a pale oval in the darkness. The drop, catch him, Jack yelled. The door behind him gave a sickening groan. The hinges were popping out of the drywall. Jack looped the makeshift rope under Matthew's arms. Go! Go now! He lifted the boy over the sill. Matthew screamed as his broken ankle bumped the wall, a high-pitched sound of agony that tore at Jack's gut. But Jack didn't stop. He couldn't. He lowered the boy hand over hand, the rough fabric burning his palms. The rope was too short. Matthew was dangling 6 feet above the ground. "Drop him," Jack yelled down. "I can't hold him." Claire didn't flinch. She extended her arms, bracing herself in the mud. "Let go! I got him! I got him!" Jack released the sheet. Matthew fell. Claire caught the brunt of his weight, collapsing backward into the muck with a grunt of impact. They rolled together in the wet grass, a tangle of limbs and cashmere and canvas. "Run!" Jack bellowed. "Get to the car! Don't wait for me!" The breeched Jack turned back to the room just as the door exploded inward. It didn't swing open. It was kicked off its hinges. The heavy slab of wood slammed onto the floor, and Spider filled the doorway. He was massive, a wall of muscle and rage, holding a rusted tire iron. The skinny guy, Rico, was behind him, looking wired and holding a switchblade. Spider looked at the empty mattress. Then he looked at the shattered window. Then he looked at Jack. A vein pulsed in the spider tattoo on his neck. "You made a big mistake, old man," Spider growled. He swung the tire iron. Jack ducked. The metal bar whistled over his head, smashing into the plaster wall where his skull had been a second ago, sending up a cloud of white dust. Jack didn't retreat. He couldn't let them get to the window. He had to buy Claire time. He lunged forward, tackling Spider around the waist. It was like tackling a vending machine. Spider didn't budge. He brought his knee up, catching Jack in the ribs. The air left Jack's lungs in a pained whoosh. Jack stumbled back, gasping. He grabbed the only weapon he had, the flathead screwdriver from his back pocket. "Get him, Rico!" Spider shouted. The skinny guy lunged with the knife. Jack sidestepped, years of bar fights and job site brawls kicking in. He caught Rico's wrist with his left hand and drove the handle of the screwdriver into the kid's solar plexus with his right. Rico folded like a lawn chair, dropping the knife and wheezing for air. But the distraction cost Jack. Spider swung the tire iron again. This time he connected. The metal bar clipped Jack's shoulder. The sound of cracking bones sickeningly filled the room. Jack screamed, his left arm going instantly numb. He fell to his knees, his vision blurring. The pain was white-hot, blinding. Spider loomed over him, raising the iron for a killing blow. "Night, night, hero." The jump Jack looked at the window. The rain was blowing in. He thought of Lily waiting in the dark. He thought of the $42 in his pocket. Not today. Jack grabbed a handful of the broken glass shards from the floor and threw them into Spider's face. "Arr!" Spider roared, stumbling back, clawing at his eyes. It was the only opening Jack would get. He scrambled to his feet, fighting the nausea. He didn't look back. He ran at the window. He didn't climb out, he threw himself through it. For a second, he was flying. The cold air rushed around him, then gravity took over. He hit the mud hard. He tried to roll like they taught in the army, but his bad shoulder slammed into the ground. A scream ripped from his throat, quickly silenced by the mud filling his mouth. He lay there for a second, staring up at the rain. The pain was overwhelming. He wanted to close his eyes. It would be so easy to just sleep. "Daddy!" The voice cut through the pain. "Lily." Jack rolled onto his side. Claire was dragging Matthew toward the street, but Lily had run back from her hiding spot. She was standing at the fence, screaming for him. Jack grit his teeth so hard he thought they would crack. He forced himself up. One knee, then the other. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, swinging sickeningly. Above him, Spider appeared at the broken window, rubbing his eyes, looking down into the yard. "I'm gonna kill you all," Spider screamed, pulling a gun from his waistband. "Move!" Jack yelled, stumbling toward the fence. "Move!" A gunshot cracked. The mud beside Jack's boot exploded. The chase was on. The gauntlet. The second gunshot didn't hit mud. It sparked off the metal post of the chain-link fence inches from Claire's head. The sound was a sharp, venomous crack that echoed through the desolate lot, distinct from the rolling thunder above. "Go! Move!" Jack screamed, his voice raw and tearing at his throat. He was running on pure adrenaline now, the kind that masks the fact that your body is failing. His left arm swung uselessly at his side, a dead weight of agony that sent white-hot spikes of nausea through his gut with every step. He stumbled through the mud, half running, half falling, positioning his broad body between the shooter in the window and the fleeing family. Claire was performing a miracle. Fueled by a mother's hysterical strength, she was practically carrying Matthew, dragging him through the slush with one arm wrapped around his chest. Matthew was screaming, a high, thin sound of pure terror that cut through the storm, his broken leg dragging agonizingly over the debris. "Almost there, baby, almost there," Claire sobbed, her expensive coat now heavy with mud and water, her hair plastered to her skull. Lily was already at the gap in the fence, holding the heavy mesh back with her tiny hands, her eyes wide with terror as she watched Spider climb out of the second-story window. He didn't use a rope. He hung from the sill and dropped, landing with a heavy, wet thud in the yard. He rolled, came up with the gun leveled, and started sprinting. He was big, he was fast, and he was closing the distance, fumbling for life. "The keys!" Claire shrieked as they reached the alley. She collapsed against the side of the black Porsche Cayenne, sliding Matthew down into the mud so she could wrench the back door open. Jack skidded around the corner of the dumpster, his chest heaving like a broken bellows. He jammed his good hand, his right hand, into his pocket. His fingers felt numb, thick like sausages. He couldn't feel the fob. "Don't drop them. For the love of God, don't drop them." He fished the keys out just as Spider rounded the corner of the fence, 20 yards away. "I see you," Spider roared, raising the pistol. Jack didn't try to unlock the door manually. He mashed the panic button on the fob. Honk, 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 honk. The car alarm blared to life, lights flashing, the sudden noise chaotic and disorienting in the narrow alley. Spider flinched, firing a wild shot that shattered the side mirror of the Porsche, sending plastic and glass spraying over Jack's face. "Get in!" Jack yelled, shoving Claire toward the driver's seat. "You drive! I can't steer!" "I can't!" Claire screamed, paralyzed by the sight of the gun. "Drive or we die!" Jack roared, grabbing her by the collar of her coat and physically throwing her toward the open door. He grabbed Lily by the back of her coat and tossed her into the back seat next to Matthew like a sack of flour, slamming the door shut. Jack scrambled for the passenger side. He grabbed the handle. A heavy hand clamped onto the back of his neck. The deadweight Spider was there. He smelled of stale beer and violence. He yanked Jack backward, spinning him around. Jack slipped in the mud, his boots finding no traction. Spider didn't shoot. He wanted to hurt. He pistol-whipped Jack across the face. The heavy steel of the gun barrel connected with Jack's cheekbone. The world exploded into stars. Jack hit the ground hard, the taste of copper filling his mouth. Spider stood over him, breathless, a cruel grin twisting his face in the flashing orange light of the car alarm. He raised the gun to Jack's forehead. "You should have stayed in your lane, trash," Spider spat. Inside the car, Lily screamed. Jack looked at the gun barrel. It looked like a tunnel. He waited for the flash. Scream! The Porsche lurched backward. Claire hadn't put it in drive. She had thrown it into reverse and stomped on the gas. The massive SUV bucked backward, the open passenger door acting like a steel battering ram. The door edge caught Spider square in the hip and thigh. There was a sickening crunch, and the gunman was launched sideways, slamming violently into the rusted metal of the dumpster. He hit the ground and didn't get up, the gun skittering away into the darkness under a pile of wet cardboard. "The getaway! Jack, get in!" Claire screamed, her voice bordering on madness. Jack rolled over, groaning. He clawed at the doorframe with his good hand, dragging his battered body into the passenger seat. His left arm flopped uselessly onto the center console. "Go, go, go!" he gasped, spitting blood onto the dashboard. Claire slammed the gear shift into drive. The tires spun, whining against the wet asphalt, smelling of burning rubber, before they caught traction. The Porsche fishtailed violently, scraping the side of the brick building with a horrible screech of metal on masonry, tearing off the paint, before shooting down the alley. They burst out onto the main street, blowing through a stop sign. Claire didn't let up. She drove like a woman possessed, weaving through the late-night traffic, running red lights, heading toward the lights of the city center. The aftermath. Inside the cabin, the silence was deafening, broken only by Matthew's whimpering in the back and the wind whistling through the shattered side window. Jack slumped against the leather seat, his head lolling back. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a tidal wave of pain that threatened to pull him under. His shoulder felt like it was on fire. His face was swelling shut. He turned his head slowly to look at Claire. She was gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles were white. She was crying silently, tears streaming down her face, but her eyes were fixed on the road. She looked wild, ruined, and terrifyingly beautiful. She wasn't the fragile socialite anymore. She was a survivor, We got him, Jack whispered, his voice slurry. Claire, we got him. Claire let out a shuddering breath, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. She reached over with one hand, blindly finding Jack's good hand on the console. She squeezed it, her nails digging into his skin. Hang on, Jack, she choked out. We're going to the hospital. Just hang on. Daddy, Lily's voice came from the back seat, small and terrified. Are you sleeping? Jack forced his eyes open. He looked in the rearview mirror. Lily was holding Matthew's hand. The boy was looking at her, not with fear, but with awe. I'm awake, baby, Jack mumbled. Just resting my eyes. But the darkness was creeping in at the edges of his vision. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and red. The heater in the car was warm, so warm. Jack Miller, the man who had fought the cold his whole life, finally felt warm. And then the world went black. The trauma bay. The transition from the chaos of the alley to the chaos of the emergency room was a blur of fluorescent lights and shouting. Claire drove the battered Porsche right up to the ambulance bay of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, ignoring the authorized vehicles only signs. She didn't park. She abandoned the car right there in the lane, the driver's side door hanging open, the engine still ticking. Security guards rushed out, ready to yell, but stopped dead when they saw her. Claire Sterling, soaked in mud, blood smeared on her cashmere coat, holding a screaming boy. And behind her, stumbling out of the passenger seat, was a giant of a man who looked like he had gone 10 rounds with a freight train. Trauma, Claire screamed, her voice cracking with a command that cut through the noise of the city. I need a trauma team. Now! Nurses and orderlies swarmed. It was a cacophony of medical jargon. BP dropping, pupils blown, possible internal bleeding. Get the PDS team for the leg. Jack felt hands on him. Many hands. They were lifting him onto a gurney. The sky spun overhead, turning from the dark, rainy Chicago night to the blinding white of the hospital ceiling tiles. Lily! Jack rasped, trying to sit up, but a firm hand pushed him back down. She's right here, sir. She's safe, a nurse said, her voice calm and practiced. Jack turned his head to the side. He saw a flash of pink, Lily's coat. A nurse was holding her hand. Lily wasn't crying anymore. She was staring at him, her face pale, her eyes wide and stoic. She gave him a tiny, trembling wave before the double doors swung shut, separating the men from the children. Then the morphine hit his IV and Jack Miller floated away into the white noise. The cost of living. When Jack opened his eyes again, the pain was gone, replaced by a dull, heavy thrumming in his shoulder. He blinked. The room was private, quiet, and smelled of lavender and antiseptic. A machine beeped rhythmically next to his head. His first thought wasn't about the kidnappers or the gun, it was about the bill. Private room, Northwestern, surgery. He tried to sit up, panic spiking in his chest. He didn't have insurance. He barely had rent. This room alone cost more than he made in 6 months. They were going to garnish his wages for the rest of his life. He'd be bankrupt. They'd take Lily away if he couldn't feed her because of the debt. Whoa, easy there, Tiger. A man was sitting in the chair in the corner. He wasn't a doctor. He was wearing a cheap suit and a loosened tie, holding a notepad. He looked tired, the way all Chicago cops looked tired. Detective Russo, CPD, the man said, standing up. He didn't loom over Jack. He leaned against the wall with a respectful distance. You've been out for about 6 hours. Surgery went well. They put 3 pins in your shoulder and stitched up your face. You got a hard head, Mr. Miller. Jack swallowed. His throat felt like sandpaper. My daughter? She's in the cafeteria with a social worker and Mrs. Sterling. Eating ice cream for breakfast, Russo grinned. She's a tough kid. Told us everything, including the part where you went Superman out a second-story window. Jack relaxed back into the pillows. The boy? Matthew is stable. Surgery on the ankle. He's gonna be fine. Russo's face hardened. And the guys you ran into? Spider is in the ICU under police guard. Broken pelvis. Internal bleeding. He's singing like a canary. We picked up the rest of the crew an hour ago. You busted a whole ring, Jack. Jack nodded slowly. Am I under arrest? It was a reflex question. In Jack's neighborhood, if you were involved in a crime scene with a body and a weapon, you were a suspect until proven otherwise. Russo looked at him surprised. Then he shook his head, closing his notepad. Arrested? Jack, the mayor is calling down here, asking when he can shake your hand. You're a hero. Russo walked to the door. Get some rest. You're going to need it for the press conference. The Det Russo left, and the silence returned. Jack stared at the ceiling. Hero. The word tasted strange. Heroes didn't worry about eviction notices. The door opened again. This time it was Claire. She had showered. The mud and blood were gone. She was wearing fresh clothes, probably brought by an assistant. A crisp blouse and slacks. But she didn't look like the icy executive anymore. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she wasn't wearing makeup. She looked human, vulnerable. She walked to the side of the bed and stood there for a long moment, just looking at him. "You're awake," she whispered. "Yeah," Jack croaked. "Look, Mrs. Sterling, about the car door. I know I wrecked it. I can work it off. I do drywall, painting. I can—" Claire let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She reached out and took Jack's good hand, holding it with both of hers. "Jack," she said firmly, "stop. I just don't want any trouble," Jack mumbled, the shame of his poverty rising up again. "I can't pay for this room." Claire squeezed his hand tighter. "This room is paid for. The surgery is paid for. The rehabilitation you're going to need for that shoulder? Paid for." Jack looked at her confused. "Charity." "No," Claire shook her head fiercely. "A debt. You gave me back my life, Jack. There is no number I can write on a check that balances that ledger. But I'm going to try." She pulled a chair close and sat down, never letting go of his hand. "I saw Matthew," she said softly, tears welling up again. "He told me what you did. He said you gave him your coat. He said you told him to be brave." She looked down at their joined hands. His rough, scarred, calloused, hers manicured and soft. The invisible line that had separated them on the street corner had been erased completely. "I judged you," Claire admitted, her voice trembling with guilt. "When I first saw you on the street, I thought you were just invisible. I was so wrong. You are the best man I have ever met." "The reunion. Can I see her?" Jack asked. "Lily?" "Of course." Claire stood up and went to the door. She waved someone in. Lily came running in. She had a chocolate stain on her chin and was holding a stuffed bear that was almost as big as she was. She stopped at the edge of the bed, looking at the tubes and the bandages. "Daddy," she whispered, scared to touch him. "Come here, Lil Bit," Jack smiled, ignoring the pain in his shoulder to open his good arm. She scrambled onto the bed, curling into his side, burying her face in his hospital gown. She smelled like hospital soap and strawberry ice cream. "I was scared," she mumbled into his chest. "I know," Jack kissed the top of her head. "But we did good, didn't we?" "We did good, Lickerners," Lily agreed. Claire watched them from the doorway, leaning against the frame. For the first time in a year, the crushing weight on her chest was gone. She watched the construction worker holding his daughter, and she knew that her life of board meetings and galas was about to change. She couldn't go back to ignoring the world outside her tinted windows. Jack looked up and met Claire's eyes over Lily's head. "Thank you," Jack mouthed. "No," Claire mouthed back. "Thank you." Outside the window, the storm had finally broken. The clouds were parting over Lake Michigan, and the first pale gray light of dawn was hitting the skyscrapers. The city was waking up, indifferent as always. But in this room, on the 7th floor, everything was different. Jack closed his eyes, holding his daughter tight. For the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of tomorrow. The gavel falls 6 months later. The Chicago winter had finally relinquished its grip on the city, replaced by the tentative, hopeful green of spring. But inside the Cook County Criminal Courthouse, the air was still sterile and cold. Jack Miller sat in the front row of the gallery, his hands resting on his knees. He wasn't wearing his canvas work jacket today. He was wearing a navy blue suit, tailored, sharp, and dignified. It was the first suit he had owned in a decade. Next to him sat Claire Sterling, her posture upright and unwavering. When the jury foreman stood up to read the verdict, the room went deadly silent. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Marcus Spider Vance, guilty on all counts: kidnapping, aggravated assault, and attempted murder." Jack didn't cheer. He didn't smile. He just let out a breath he felt like he had been holding since that rainy night in the alley. He looked across the aisle. Matthew was there, sitting with a child psychologist. The boy didn't look terrified anymore. He looked at Spider, the man who had haunted his nightmares, being handcuffed and led away by the bailiffs, and he didn't flinch. The monster was just a man in an orange jumpsuit now. As the courtroom cleared, Detective Russo walked over, shaking Jack's hand. "Justice was slow, Jack, but it arrived. You can sleep now." "I sleep fine," Jack replied, his voice steady. It's waking up that's getting better. Thanksgiving on the Gold Coast, fast forward to November. The wind was howling off Lake Michigan again, but this time, Jack wasn't fighting it on a street corner. He was watching it from the 42nd floor of a penthouse overlooking the Gold Coast. It was Thanksgiving Day. The aroma filling the apartment wasn't stale cigarettes or mildew. It was roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and pumpkin pie. The long dining table was set with crystal and silver, but the atmosphere was anything but stiff. "Dad, watch this!" Lily came sprinting through the living room, wearing a velvet dress that matched the ribbons in her hair. Chasing her, laughing hysterically, was Matthew. His limp was almost gone now, just a slight hitch in his step when he ran too fast. "No running in the house," Claire called out from the kitchen, but she was laughing as she said it. She walked out holding a platter of candied yams, her face flushed with the heat of the oven and genuine happiness. Jack stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, holding a glass of apple cider. He looked at his reflection in the glass. The scar on his cheekbone had faded to a thin white line, a souvenir of the night he crossed the line. His shoulder still ached when it rained, a permanent reminder of the price of courage, but he wore it like a badge of honor. "Penny for your thoughts?" Claire asked, coming up beside him. Jack turned away from the view of the city lights. "Just thinking about last year. We were eating gas station sandwiches for Thanksgiving. Now," he gestured around the opulent room, "it feels like a different life." "It is a different life," Claire corrected him gently. "For all of us. Matthew laughs again because of you. I breathe again because of you." The blueprint. After dinner, while the kids were sprawled out on the rug watching the parade on TV, Claire pulled a thick envelope from a drawer in the sidebar. She slid it across the mahogany table toward Jack. Jack hesitated. "Claire, we talked about this. No more checks. I'm working. I'm good." "Open it," she insisted. "It's not a check." Jack opened the envelope. Inside wasn't cash. It was a stack of legal documents. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Articles of Incorporation, Miller and Sterling Construction." Jack looked up, confused. "What is this?" "I have the capital, the connections, and the real estate projects," Claire explained, her eyes shining with excitement. "You have the knowledge, the skill, and the work ethic. I'm tired of hiring contractors who cut corners. I want a partner I can trust with my life. Literally." She pointed to the papers. 50-50 partnership. You run the crews, you manage the sites. I handle the financing and the contracts. Full benefits. College fund for Lily included in the bylaws. Jack looked at the papers. He thought about the years of being overlooked, of being the invisible man in the dirty boots. He thought about the way people used to look through him. "You're betting a lot on a guy who didn't finish college," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm betting on the guy who jumped out of a second-story window for a child who wasn't his," Claire smiled. "That's the only resume I need. So, partner, do we have a deal?" Jack stood up. He wiped his hand on his pants out of habit, then extended it. "Deal," Jack said. They shook hands. It wasn't a handshake between a rich woman and a poor man. It was a handshake between equals. The invisible line erased. Later that night, Jack tucked Lily into bed in the guest room that had basically become her second bedroom. "Daddy?" Lily yawned, hugging her giant bear. "Yeah, baby. Are we rich now?" Jack laughed softly, smoothing her hair back. "We have enough, lil' bit. We have enough to be safe. We have enough to help others. And we have friends who love us." "That's good," she murmured, her eyes closing, "because I don't want to be invisible again." "You never were," Jack whispered, kissing her forehead. "I always saw you." Jack walked out into the hallway. He looked at Matthew's room, where the boy was sleeping soundly, safe and warm. He looked at the city below, millions of lights representing millions of stories. The invisible line that divided the city, the line between the haves and the have-nots, the seen and the unseen, was still there for many. But for Jack Miller and Claire Sterling, that line had been erased by a single act of courage. They had proved that while money can build walls, only love can break them down. And as the snow began to fall gently over Chicago, covering the grit and the gold alike in a blanket of pure white, Jack Miller finally felt at home. Conclusion and thought-provoking question. This story reminds us that heroism isn't about wearing a cape or having $1 billion. It's about the willingness to step into the darkness when everyone else looks away. Jack and Lily didn't have money, but they had something far more valuable: the courage to care. I want to ask you a question. If you were standing on that street corner in the rain and you saw someone crying for help, would you have stopped? Or would you have kept walking, afraid to cross that invisible line? It's a hard question to answer honestly. But remember, the world doesn't change because of big opinions. It changes because of small acts of kindness. Call to action. If this story touched your heart, please smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We bring you powerful, human stories every week that remind us of the good in the world. Don't forget to hit the like button if you're glad Matthew got home safe, and share this video with someone who needs to believe in hope today. Thanks for watching, and remember, be the person who stops. See you in the next story.